Good job, Margaret. Okay. Let us share screen. There we go. Okay. What are we going to do today? Today, we will continue our study of using meditation to achieve Ruach HaKodesh, or enlightenment. And we're going to focus on conversing with God, which Rabbi Kaplan mentioned a few classes ago, and he has a whole chapter in the book, Jewish meditation, about it, and we're going to start reviewing that today. We'll also discuss how mental states can help improve our personal meditation or understanding of mental states. Bhante goes deep into that. It's remarkably interesting and deep. Okay, so we're here in our map of meditation methodologies that we're studying from traditional spiritual Judaism. Ruach HaKodesh is here. And I'm connecting conversing with God to Ruach HaKodesh because Rabbi Kaplan talks about how Ruach HaKodesh, in order to get Ruach HaKodesh, or enlightenment, you need to develop certain personality characteristics. And they're listed here: study through holiness. And then he goes on to give a lot of examples about how people develop these personal characteristics, how they transcend the physical, how they transcend themselves. So it's becoming a huge field of endeavor here, and working on yourself becomes a full-time job, and there's many ways to do that. He did mention that there was an actual movement in Judaism called the Musar movement that promoted work on yourself and becoming a better person. And it involved reviewing specific teachings that helped you become more ethical, moral, religious. You do that on a regular basis, and you become a better person. He did mention how Abraham was the model of this. Abraham thought about his life, and he engaged in a conversation with God, which we're going to learn more about. And through that conversation, he actually upgraded his life. He basically, we would call today, made aliyah. He uplifted his family and said, we're off, based on the understanding he got through the conversation with God. Okay, and as Rabbi Kaplan was discussing that, he did once again emphasize that what's key to the whole process, the meditation process, the whole idea of developing certain personality characteristics, the whole thing of becoming a better person, key to all of that is self-control, direct control of your thoughts, power over the contents of your mind, what's going on inside. Okay. So, and he mentioned that when you do that, when you go inside and you decide to take charge of what's going on, you actually you come in contact with God. And we're going to wrestle with what that means. But he says, on the one hand, you can understand God by thinking about the world around you and him being the creator and the master of the universe. But at the same time, he says, you can also go inside and discover God as well. And that is kind of hard to wrap your mind around. And where he landed to kind of reconcile the oddity of God being out there and then here at the same time, so to speak, is, well, you talk to him. That's how you kind of make the ends meet. You establish a relationship, kind of, through a conversation with God. So we're going to find out what he means by that more in depth. He has a whole chapter on it. So let us proceed. This is what he says. We are right here. And there's a bunch of headings for this. So we're going to spend a couple of weeks on this. In the previous chapter, I discussed meditative techniques that are both highly advanced and potentially dangerous for a beginner. So he did, and we kind of touched on that. Thinking about nothing was an example, and we did say last time that's very advanced. We're not going to dwell on it because you need to be really prepared and skilled. So we're not at that point yet. So he says the technique that I shall discuss in this chapter that we're discussing right now, on the other hand, is very simple and is considered among the safest. Still, many people feel that it is one of the most powerful of all the Jewish meditative techniques. Earlier, he says, I spoke about how difficult it is to speak or even to think about God. God is totally ineffable, beyond the realms of thought and speech. Yet, as difficult as it is to speak about God, it is relatively easy to speak to him. There you go. Key definition. We're not talking about God. We're talking to God. What person has not at some point in life prayed to God in his own words? Good question. I doubt there's very few. I doubt there's very many that have not done this. What person has not? If one is a believer, it is a natural reflex in times of trouble or distress to direct one's word toward God. When a loved one is ill or when one faces something unfaceable, one's thoughts and prayers automatically flow toward the Supreme Being. Prayer is a cry from the depths of the heart, from the ground of one's being, and communications is simple and direct. Children naturally tend to pray to God. A child who is lonely or hurt will automatically call out to his Father in heaven. A child who has never been taught to pray may begin to do so on his own. It is as if there were a built-in instinct that leads us to call beyond the realm of the physical when we are in dire need. I can say from personal experience that when I was a little kid, I did that many times, and I certainly had no formal instruction in theology or religion. It seems that in general, Jews pray spontaneously less than non-Jews, at least nowadays. That's an interesting point. I wonder if that's right. There seems to be a feeling that Jewish prayer must be in Hebrew in a prescribed manner with a predetermined wording. Many Jews are surprised to learn that there is an unbroken tradition of spontaneous prayer in the Jewish religion. If we look at the spectrum of Jewish literature, we find numerous references to spontaneous personal prayer. Many great Jewish leaders considered their own prayers to be very important to their spiritual development. And in Europe, it was the most natural thing in the world for Jews to cry out to God in their native Yiddish. I think he's very much in the ballpark here. We tend to daven. We tend to go to a Beit HaKnesset, a synagogue. We tend to follow the book, the prescribed order. In Hebrew, yes. However, Rabbi Kaplan, in his thorough research, is informing us that at the same time, we have a very strong tradition of spontaneous prayer, which we'll learn anytime, any place, in whatever language you have, according to whatever script or mindset you have at the time. Although many sources discuss spontaneous prayer, one Jewish leader gave it a central role in his teachings, Rabbi Nachman of Brazlev. Rabbi Nachman was a great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, founder of the Hasidic movement. The Baal Shem taught that every individual could attain a strong personal relationship with God. Rabbi Nachman expanded this concept, teaching that the most powerful method to attain such a relationship with God is personal prayer in one's own native language. This, of course, was not meant to downgrade the importance of the formal system of worship, which forms the Jews' daily order of devotion. The prescribed worship service is of paramount importance in Judaism. However, worship services can at times become dry and sterile. One's own personal prayers, on the other hand, are always connected to the well springs of the heart. How does a person begin to speak to God? In times of crisis or trouble, it is almost automatic. There is a need to call out to someone, and one knows that God is always there. When our lives are on an even keel, on the other hand, it is not as easy. When everything is going our way, what is there to discuss with God? How does one begin a conversation? Sometimes it is almost embarrassing. I would add that one way to start the conversation is saying, thanks, God. Things are going good. That's when you show an attitude of gratitude. All right, let's see what Rabbi Kaplan says. It is very much like being away from a parent or a close friend for a long time. In times of crisis, it is easy to renew contact since the crisis itself serves as a point of departure. Similarly, when there are special occasions, it is easy to pick up the phone and say hello. This is why relatives often see one another only at weddings and funerals. Such occasions serve as an excuse to get together after prolonged absence. To pick up the phone and, without any excuse, call a friend you have not spoken to in years is not a very easy thing to do. How does one justify the sudden, unexpected call? And perhaps most important of all, how does one justify not having made contact for the long period after the call? I think that he's pretty correct here. I think he's talking about call reluctance, meaning that you think you're supposed to have been in touch with God. You haven't been, like, all right, so how do you start the conversation? For very much the same reason, it is difficult for some people to begin a conversation with God. How does one start such a conversation, and what does one say? If you need an excuse, you can use this book. Tell God, I just read this book about having conversations with God. I felt it was time I did it. I think that's pretty clever. That's a good idea. Or you say, well, God, I just went to this class on conversing with you, and I think it's a good idea. So why don't we get it going? Another problem that people encounter when attempting to speak to God is that they feel inadequate. They are aware that God knows their shortcomings and sins, and they feel ashamed in his presence. That would probably be a good leap of personal growth to be able to say, God, I'm here, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you have no pretension, because if you understand, well, there's no hiding, then actually it's to your benefit, because you kind of get over this self-consciousness and say, God, let's talk about what I'm reluctant to talk about. Others may feel that their lives as Jews are not what they should be, and that they cannot approach God as a Jew. I'm sure that's very true. God, I didn't keep Shabbos the way I should have. I can't talk to you now. I feel inadequate. Even if one felt comfortable morally and religiously, and who really does, good point, there is a basic awe and feeling of inadequacy that everyone feels when trying to speak to God. It is told that the great Hasidic leader, Rabbi Zusia of Hanapali, he's from the 1700s, once came late to synagogue. When he was asked what happened, he replied that when he woke up in the morning, he began the usual prayer, Modeh ani lefanecha, I give thanks before you. He said the first three words and could go no further. He explained, I became suddenly aware of who the I was and who the you was. I was struck speechless and could not continue. All right, so we got awestruck. All this adds up to the fact that many people consider it extremely difficult to initiate a conversation with God. Rabbi Nachman speaks about this at considerable length. So what do we do? It is significant that Rabbi Nachman refers to this practice of speaking to God not as prayer, but as meditation. It appears that the line between prayer and meditation here is a very fine one, but there is an important difference. Excuse me. When a person speaks to God spontaneously, whenever he feels impelled to do so, excuse me, and then it is prayer. When a person makes it a fixed practice and spends a definite time each day conversing with God, then it is meditation. As we have discussed earlier, meditation is thinking in a controlled manner. If this thinking consists in a conversation with God, it is no less a meditative experience. That's very interesting, because I bet you that people would think it's the reverse. I bet you that people would think that speaking to God in a controlled manner and a fixed practice would be the prayer, and doing it spontaneously would be the meditation. Because you're used to thinking about prayer in a fixed order, fixed time, fixed place, fixed script, fixed language. But what Rabbi Kaplan's pointing out from Rabbi Nachman is that it's the reverse. The spontaneous pouring out of the heart is the prayer, but the fixed practice is the meditation. And why do we say that? It's because, as he says, as we've been learning, one of the core functions of meditation is to elevate yourself, is to develop stronger and stronger skills at going within, at looking within, at thinking, at controlling your thoughts. And that requires effort over time, effort over time, effort over time, effort over time. So if you make it a practice to converse with God, effort over time, you're making a meditation out of it. It's the repetition and the consistency that makes it, that gives it a skill building and consciousness raising benefit. And that's why he calls it benefit. That's why he calls it meditation. In this context, in the context of conversing with God a meditation, Rabbi Nachman prescribes making a commitment to spending a fixed amount of time each day speaking to God. The amount of time he prescribes is approximately an hour every evening. In our fast-moving modern society, many find 20 to 30 minutes a more comfortable period for such conversation. The main thing is that it be for a fixed period of time and that it be practiced every day without fail. Okay. So he's talking about incorporating conversing with God into your daily spiritual practice as yet another form of meditation. And obviously, for many people, it's probably too much to bite off at the first time to do an hour, maybe 20 minutes, okay, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. But the point is to do it consistently, to build on the momentum that you're creating as you did it yesterday and the day before and the day before. The most difficult thing is to begin. Rabbi Nachman advises sitting down in the place where you meditate and saying to yourself, for the next 20 minutes, I will be alone with God. This in itself is significant, since it is like the beginning of a visit. Even if there is nothing to say, it is a valid experience, since you are spending time alone with God, aware of his presence. If you sat long enough, says Rabbi Nachman, you will eventually find something to say. So you're setting the stage. It's like if you're going to visit with somebody, you'd say, all right, let's meet at the bench outside, or let's meet at the cafe, or let's meet wherever. That's what you're doing here. God, let's meet at my porch every day at 5 o'clock before I eat dinner. And you just sit there and you're like, well, I'm here, he's here. Okay, might as well talk. If you have difficulty in beginning the conversation, Rabbi Nachman advises repeating the phrase, Master of the Universe, Ribono Shel Olam, Ribono Shel Olam, Ribono Shel Olam, over and over. This can comprise the entire conversation. When you say these words, be aware that you are calling out to God. Eventually, your thoughts will open up and you will find other ways of expressing yourself. Of course, Master of the Universe is nothing other than Ribono Shel Olam, a phrase that I discussed earlier as a Jewish mantra. Here we see that it can also be used to call out to God in a most basic way to establish communication. So I think that's an interesting point to make because it shows the importance of the mental idea of what you're doing. Meaning that if you're using Ribono Shel Olam as a mantra, you understand that your purpose is to be able to get deeper and deeper inside yourself and kind of raise your consciousness that way and become quieter, become more silent, to go further and further within. But the second setting is to use Ribono Shel Olam differently and say, well, I'm reaching out to you, God. You're there, I'm here, and I'm starting the conversation by internally calling out to you or even saying it out loud. So I think it's real important to understand that your kavana or your intent makes a big difference on the impact the words you say will have. That is really key. And if anybody has a question on that, bring it up later. If you still cannot begin speaking with God, Rabbi Nachman suggests making this difficulty itself the point of conversation. Tell God how much you would like to speak to him. Explain to him that it is hard for you to find something to say. Ask God to help you find words with which to address him. Discuss the problem with him as you would with a good friend. Once the conversation has begun, it is usually easy to continue. Now, what's really fascinating about this is that this parallels exactly what Bhante has been saying about handling distractions in meditation. This is applying mindfulness. If we are meditating and we get a distraction, some kind of urge, some kind of thought, then you apply mindfulness and you're basically saying, oh, there I am going off the track. There I am thinking about this. There I am thinking about that. As opposed to resisting it, you're like, oh, there I am. You're taking a step back from it. And Rabbi Kaplan's saying that Rabbi Nachman says, you're doing the exact same thing. You're taking a step back from it and saying, well, God, I wanted to say something, but I have nothing to say. So let's talk about the fact that I have nothing to say. It's the same technique. So you could see how the skills we're developing and applying mindfulness through the seated meditation can be transferred into this meditation of conversing with God and overcoming roadblocks by applying mindfulness to the roadblocks. And in this case, the technique of applying the mindfulness is actually telling God about the roadblock. It's to say you're in the meditation with Bhante, you're saying to yourself, kind of, well, there I am, getting distracted again. And in the case of meditation with conversing with God, you're like, God, here I am trying to talk to you and not having the words. Same process. I think that's fascinating. Okay, let's just do a time check. We're good. Another point of departure can be the feeling of alienation and distance from God. You can initiate a conversation by asking God to bring you closer to him. Tell him how far you feel from him and how much closer you would like to be. Ask him to help you find such closeness. So that's an emotional outreach to God. The conversation does not have to vary. One can speak to God about the same thing day after day, week after week. Obviously, it is impossible to bore God. Since this is a meditation, the regular habit of holding a conversation is as important as its content. If you are asking God to help you speak to him or to draw you closer, this exercise will help you develop your ability to hold more extensive conversations with God. Okay, we're going to pick up next week on the repetition aspect of this and how that develops. That's an earful. Okay. So now we're going to learn from Bhante about handling distractions, in particular, the importance of mental states. A distraction is any mental state that arises to impede your meditation. Some of these are quite subtle. It is useful to list some of the possibilities. The negative states are pretty easy to spot. Insecurity, fear, anger, depression, irritation, frustration. He says, if you sit and you meditate and you're feeling any of these, it's easy to get distracted. Craving and desire are a bit more difficult to spot because they can apply to things we normally regard as virtuous or noble. You can experience the desire to perfect yourself. You can feel craving for greater virtue. You can even develop an attachment to the bliss of the meditation experience itself. It is a bit hard to detach yourself from such noble feelings. In the end, though, it is just more greed. It is a desire for gratification and a clever way of ignoring the present moment reality. So I think he's correct in that idea. Meaning, by the way, so let's just go down to here. Meaning that outside of meditative experience, you might feel good about the fact that I love to meditate. I love going deep. I love the feeling of peace. I love the quiet. I crave that. I can't wait to do it tomorrow. That outside of a meditative position, a meditative setting, that might be good. But he's saying to think that way when you're trying to meditate is just like you reminding yourself, well, I crave for this stuff. Well, that's not what's important now. What's important now is meditating. So you could see it's just another craving. And the meditative experience, meditating on that, helps you understand that it's another craving. It's a craving something good. And the Torah speaks a lot about, you want to get up, bounce out of bed, ready to do mitzvot. What's the first one to do? Okay. You got to lust for that. It's craving. But you have to understand that's what it is. It doesn't mean you don't have it, but you have to understand what it is. And that's his. So you can see he has the ability to take a step back so you understand what makes you tick. Trickiest of all, however, are those really positive mental states that come creeping into your meditation. Happiness, peace, inner contentment, sympathy, and compassion for all beings everywhere. These mental states are so sweet and so benevolent that you can scarcely bear to pry yourself loose from them. It makes you feel like a traitor to humanity. There is no need to feel this way. We are not advising you to reject these states of mind or to become heartless robots. We merely want you to see them for what they are. They are mental states. They come and they go. They arise and they pass away. As you continue your meditation, these states will arise more often. The trick is not to become attached to them. Just see each one as it comes up. See what it is, how strong it is, and how long it lasts. Then watch it drift away. It is all just more of the passing show of your own mental universe. Now, there's a Jewish parallel to this. In Kohelet, Ethan Dorshav has a really interesting commentary on Kohelet, on the book of Ecclesiastes, which I think at some point maybe we'll get into, if we can fit it in. But the reason why I'm bringing it up is that he says the same thing, that King Solomon, when he wrote this, is basically letting us know that that's what life's all about. And Ethan Dorshav goes out of his way to say, it doesn't mean that you don't care about anything. It doesn't mean that life is just out of control. What it means is that things come and go. You know, there's a rise and there's a fall. There's what's happening now moves on to the next moment. That's exactly what Bhante is saying here. It's like you just have to, you can't get wrapped up completely in the moment so that it pulls you away, because what's sad now is going to end up being happy and so on. And that's a very Jewish thing. We're aware of like the yin yang element of things, where one thing turns to another. And that's why we break a glass under the chuppah, because at the happiest moment of the couple, they remember the destruction of the temple. And we're full of yin yang, and we're full of the idea that one thing leads to another type of thing. And that's what he's talking about. So it's important to understand, and he's taking us a step up with this and saying, we really have to understand that mental state. It's not just the individual thoughts and the feelings and the images that pop up, that we have to let them go, but the mental state as a whole that generated that thought is something that passes too, and we can't get too carried away with that. We enjoy it, or it brings us down, whatever the effect is, and then we let it move on. So we may have a particular thought or a feeling, and he's helping us understand that it's a mental state that generated that thought or feeling. And just as we have to let the thought or feeling go, see it for what it is, and let it go, the mental state as a whole, we have to do the same thing. So we can see that this is a really Jewish idea. Just as breathing comes in stages, so do the mental states. Every breath has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Every mental state has a birth, a growth, and a decay. You should strive to see these stages clearly. This is no easy thing to do, however. As we have already noted, every thought and sensation begins first in the unconscious region of the mind, and only later rises to consciousness. We generally become aware of such things only after they have arisen in the conscious realm and stayed there for some time. Indeed, we usually become aware of distractions only when they have released their hold on us and are already on their way out. It is at this point that we are struck with a sudden realization that we have been somewhere daydreaming, fantasizing, or whatever. Quite obviously, this is far too late in the chain of events. We may call this phenomenon catching the lion by his tail, and that is an unskillful thing to do. Like confronting a dangerous beast, we must approach mental states head on. Patiently, we will learn to recognize them as they arise from progressively deeper levels of our unconscious mind. And that's where we're going to pick up next week. So that is, you talk about self-awareness. That's what this man is talking about. So you know that you have become a better meditator and more in control when you can sense the mental state. When you sense the mental state coming on, it's like somebody get a headache, or I feel a headache coming on. You sense a mental state coming on of good or bad or in between, even before it hits you in the face and you start having all these thoughts and stuff. You sense it like from deeper. That's where he wants us to go. That's what we're going to try to get. Okay. We will stop the share. Margaret, please do your thing.